Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Proposed 2023 Resolutions. I'm Debbie Singizer, and I'm the Director of School Board Services at the Vermont School Boards Association. Here's our team, the VSBA team, and you'll be hearing very shortly from Flora and Kara. Flora Diaz-Smith is our VSBA Vice President, and she is also the Chair of the Resolutions Committee. And to her right is VSBA's Director of Policy Services and Legislative Affairs, Kara Zimmerman. So just as a reminder for those, and maybe for the first time for those who do not know, the 2023 VSBA annual meeting will be held in person on October 26th at 4 p.m. at the Lake Maury Resort. There's also going to be an option to participate remotely via Zoom. This year, there are 5 resolutions proposed by member boards, 4 resolutions proposed by VSBA's Resolutions Committee, and some recommendations from the Resolutions Committee regarding existing resolutions. So each member supervisory union or supervisory district in good standing can designate one delegate to cast one vote at the association's annual meeting. And we encourage SUs and SD boards to discuss the proposed resolutions and provide guidance to their voting delegates at their September or October board meetings. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Kara, who's going to review the resolutions process for us. Kara.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we will be looking at all of the resolutions that were submitted by boards and by the Resolution Committee earlier in the summer. I say all because all resolutions, no matter how the VSBA board voted, will be considered by the full delegation at the annual business meeting in October. We will then look at any amendments to our regular and continuing resolutions. I want to start by reminding everyone of the purpose of our resolutions. Article 16E of the VSBA bylaws state that when passed by 60% of the voting delegates, a resolution shall become a position or statement of the association. Each position shall be voted as a resolution or a continuing resolution. Continuing resolutions shall be statements of association policy which are of an ongoing or permanent nature and shall be in effect until amended at a subsequent annual meeting of the association. Resolutions shall be statements of specific positions on behalf of the association and shall be in effect until the next annual meeting when they may be deleted, continued, or amended by a vote of the membership. VSBA resolutions provide guidance to VSBA staff and board when we are working in the legislature or developing program and services for our members. Resolutions are generated by member school district boards, VSBA Board of Directors, and the Resolution Committee. The Resolution Committee meets prior to the annual meeting to consider all proposed resolutions it has received, and also to review all continuing and regular resolutions. The committee makes a recommendation to the full VSBA board to pass, do not pass, or take no action on each resolution submitted by a member school board. The committee also reviews all regular and continuing resolutions and makes a recommendation to the full VSBA board to delete, adopt for 1 year, amend, or for continuing resolutions only, take no action, or for regular resolutions only, take no action. The VSBA board then reviews the Resolution Committee report and makes its own recommendations. At the annual meeting, a delegate from each VSBA member, supervisory union, or supervisory district votes on all resolutions, including any changes to existing resolutions. In today's webinar, we will review each resolution for consideration for FY24, and provide the VSBA board's position. The chair of the resolution committee is Flor Diaz-Smith, and she will facilitate the presentation of the proposals. As a reminder, the delegation will vote on all resolutions, including any changes to existing resolutions at the annual meeting, regardless of the board's position. And without further ado, I will hand it to you, Flor.
I just want to first start, I'm not going to read all the names, but I want to start by thanking the resolutions committee. We had a representative from each region, like Karen mentioned. So I would really want to thank them, but also want to thank our supporting team for helping us, because this wouldn't be possible without Cara and Sandra worked with our committee this year too. So I want to thank them and Carrie and Debbie for all the logistics for today. I just want to let you know that the committee looked at all of the resolutions with an equity lens. And I want to mention this so that when you go into thinking about the resolutions and listening to this presentation, you also think about how this resolution will affect a program, a practice, or a decision, or how our assumptions or our own biases it will affect the policy or the program or wherever we're trying to affect. We have a really great equity lens tool in our website, and I would suggest that you take a look at that before going to the annual meeting. Second, I want to remind you guys that the packet is posted on their annual meeting. So after the resolution or during the presentation, you can go in and look at the packet that the resolutions committee worked on. And last, let me see, I know I had one more thing, but let's just get started. I'm gonna remember at the very end, but let's get started and introduce Garrett Palm, Chair of the Norwich School Board. Welcome, Garrett.
Great, thanks everyone. And actually my 1 p.m. was canceled this morning, so if I'm hanging on to the end, you know that that's why, so. The time crunches. So if I share my screen, is that the best way to do it?
Yes, please. And then we'll go back to the presentation.
So it says host disable participant screen sharing.
Okay.
I just enabled it for you, Garrett.
There we go. There we go. Hold on a second. All right, is everyone seeing this? Okay. All right, so our the resolution, it's a little bit complex, but the underlying question is really simple. It's why do residents in Vermont pay higher property taxes than non-residents in about 34% of Vermont towns? Sorry, let me hold on. Good, there we go. So this was the resolution. I don't really need to basically I think everyone's read this resolution, so we don't need to read it. But basically what we're doing is we're asking towns like Norwich and the other those 34% of the towns to at least allow to charge the same homestead and non-homestead residential tax rate. So this here, again, don't need to look at this detail because it's probably very small on your screen, but this is showing all of the towns in Vermont where the homestead rate is higher than non-homestead tax rate. So as I said, there's, I think, 82 of the, get that done on my spreadsheet in front of you, but it's about 35% of all towns are in this situation. Yes, there are towns that obviously are in the opposite situation where their homestead rate's higher. So this is why, having been on our budget committee now for a number of years, it's become so acute in a town like Vermont. So again, 88 of the 259 towns that we have the data for have a homestead rate that's higher than the non-homestead tax rate. And using Norwich as an example, and Norwich is a good example because I think, like many towns in the state of Vermont, we have not had a reassessment done in at least as long as I've been here, which is 10 years. So that means that the grand lists are very consistent, right? Because they have not been reassessed. So the grand list back in the data that I'm showing here in 17, for example, versus what it is today, basically represents the exact same valuation data, right? Because there's been no assessment. So what we've seen here in Norwich, at least, is that the homestead grand list has actually shrunk, and the non-residential grand list has actually increased by about 9%. again, the underlying causes for that are a little bit unclear. You can't absolutely say why or why not, but it means that, the trends, at least which we believe is that obviously there are either more commercial properties, which is not very likely in Norwich because we really have no commercial, there's nothing commercial in town, or it means that there's been more residents selling to non-residents. And then at least, and again, that it's all going to come down to the tax rates, but just using our tax rate as an example, if you were to apply the homestead tax rate versus the non-homestead tax rate, and again, this is what was on the data on the previous slide, and it's what we used in our budget last year, and this has been adjusted for the CLA. So this is actually what's generating the tax revenue. You're looking at the non-homestead rate of 4.6 million at the non-homestead rate, and if we were allowed to apply the homestead rate to that, it would be 5.2 million. So about $500,000 of additional taxes generated. And this really comes down to why we've been quite passionate about this subject. So again, most towns, and again, I know from an equity standpoint, are facing very serious housing issues. We are too, including housing shortages and lack of affordable housing. So that's been exacerbated by people buying second homes. Many towns are facing extremely high property taxes. Again, you can just read the bullets here. And us in particular, looking at an extremely high increase to the tune of about 30% tax rate increase due to the implementation weighting study. So as you can imagine, there's some panic in our town because there's no way that we're going to be able to absorb a 30% tax increase. One of the big problems that we're seeing in our area, and I'm sure all around Vermont, is there's a lot of residents that do not generate enough income to afford to either buy a house or pay property taxes, including those that work in fields like teaching, right, nursing, a lot of our services in town. And again, I look at this and we're saying one of our greatest resources in our state is it's a desirable place to own property, which is why a lot of non-residents are buying second homes. And again, that's exacerbating the first three bullets. And then the final point is that, as we're looking at the implementation in our education, I think it's pretty obvious that the state of Vermont needs to constantly be trying to find new sources of tax revenue to fund a lot of these initiatives. So it comes down to the questions of why do non-residents pay lower property taxes than residents? And sorry, that's a typo, in 34% of our towns. And why are we in essential subsidizing non-residents? Because that's effectively what this is, at least in these towns. And again, the other bit exasperating here is that towns that border Vermont, like New Hampshire, they don't do that. So if you are a non-resident or a resident, everyone pays the exact same tax rate. And then the final slide here is, so the resolution is simply allowing towns that have a lower non-homestead tax rate to charge non-residents the same tax rate as residents. So this proposal is not affecting any of the folks that has the opposite situation. It's just allowing those 34% of the towns, the 88 towns that have a non-homestead rate that's lower than the homestead rate, to be able to at least make it equal. And just so everyone knows, this isn't an idea that hasn't gotten traction yet. We have actually raised this to both our local state representatives and our senators that represent us, at least our district. Our understanding is that Jim Massland, who's our local rep, has raised this with the Ways and Means Committee, which I believe he's the chair of, during the past legislative session. It did generate quite a bit of interest. People understood the idea, but then it came down to some complexity as far as questions and how it was going to be able to be modeled into the situation. And one of the questions, of course, that came up was, in the state of Vermont, we have just a non-homestead and a homestead rate. So it would probably require making a commercial rate, because the non-homestead rate is both residential as well as commercial. Again, I think our view is that perhaps an oversimplification, but differentiating between non-residents who own residential property and businesses that own commercial property shouldn't be that complex. It's done in states all around us. And again, it should not impact any towns where the non-homestead rate tax is already higher. That would just continue.
Thank you, Garrett. So as you all heard, this is the Norwich proposal. And the recommendation of the board was to do not pass. We did not have until now this explanation from Garrett, and we basically our understanding was that they were not asking us to do it, but they were asking us to study it. So the next proposal is from Missisquoi Valley School District. Jen was not able to join us today. As you can see here, the be it resolved is what they're asking us. The requirement for school districts in Vermont to pay a federal grant assessment to the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System for teachers funded by federal grants shall be eliminated. We, the undesigner, hereby express our support for this resolution and call upon the state legislature to take a swift action to rectify this unjust burden on school districts, ensure the optimal utilization of federal grant funds for the benefit of Vermont students. The board recommendation was to not pass, and a brief explanation of discussion was that we didn't think we had enough information to have a strong opinion. Our recommendation was that a wide state study on how much school districts rely on grants and how much burden the state should carry on that was our recommendation to them. They can follow up and present a modified resolution at the annual meeting, but for now this was what the committee decided and the board agreed to. So without delay, let's move into the next one. So now we're going to move to North Country Union Full School District. Next proposal. So I'm going to introduce Judy Castoni. She is a member of the North Country Union Full School Board, and the stage is yours.
Our board just really felt strongly that the surplus monies in the education fund should not be used to, to given back to taxpayers, but should be used for the purposes for which they were intended, which is to help the students of Vermont. And the two proposals that we had, which was to help school districts offset the cost of unemployment insurance, and to also provide individual schools with funds to support the arts and entertainment programs, were just two things we put in there because we thought those were two ideas to use those funds for. There's as you all know, and it's reaching crisis points, shortage of staff in Vermont schools, especially support staff, and doing something to help both attract support staff to work in our schools and to retain support staff, because during the summer, support staff professionals are not paid during summer and during breaks, and that impacts their decision about whether to work in schools or not. And the serious staff shortage is really impacting our ability to provide a quality education to our students. And also cuts to school funding is severely impacting arts programs and those sorts of programs in the schools. So those were the reasons that we picked those two things. However, we're not necessarily tied to those two ways to use those funds, but did feel really strongly that surplus monies in the Vermont Education Fund should go for what their original purpose was, which is to support Vermont students. We really feel like that's our biggest resources, our Vermont students, and the funds that might be used to go back to taxpayers, the little amount of money taxpayers might get back from that, and I don't have those figures in front of me, we thought would be better used helping Vermont students with real services. So I guess that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Judy. So the board recommendation for this resolution was do not pass. Again, you guys would be able to decide that at the meeting. We understood the aspirational part of the resolution. We like the intent, but the intent of the resolution is too narrow and prescribes how to spend the surplus money. So there was, we're the entire state. That is just a couple of bullets from why the decision was made. Let's move into the next resolution. So let's move to Addison Northwest. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us. The stage is yours.
Okay, so the general idea behind this resolution was that there have been a number of changes that have impacted local school boards, local school districts that have come down from the State Board of Education and Agency of Education that have left some confusion and some small crises, including the attempted change to create e-finance, which has been shelved the longitudinal data study, which has not really happened. We're not getting the data we were promised. Changes to assessments such as SBAC going to Cognita, which has some growing pains. Changes to how special ed is funded. All things that have left local districts with questions. And so our thought was that if the SBA worked with the Superintendent's Association's Council of Special Education, business managers and legislators to try and put together some recommendations to present to the governor, and through the governor, the appointed state board and the appointed secretary of the Agency of Education, as to how things can work more efficiently or have a better hand in operating to the best of student benefits, especially with regard to at least 6 current resolutions that VSBA has that rely on things like data that we expect to get and haven't gotten for years. So the idea was just to be able to put together some recommendations formally and present them.
Thank you, Mark. The board recommendation was do not pass, and I don't have it. Mark did a really good job explaining what it was. The concern was that we had it was doubling down in existing resolutions. Again, the entire state is going to be able to have this discussion at our meeting in October. So moving right on to Winooski School District, we have Steve Berbecca with us. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Flora. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Berbecco. I'm a school board member in Winooski School District. I'm also director of the Mental Health Initiative, a program of United Way in Northwest Vermont. I edit the 802 Ed, a biweekly newsletter about education policy and practice in Vermont. And I also provide counseling services at an elementary school. And in all 4 of these capacities, I have been seeing what I would guess all of you have been seeing professionally, if not personally, that Vermont is not alone across the United States in experiencing a youth mental health crisis. This has been amplified by the U.S. Surgeon General and in a recent advisory. And the data that we have and that we've been tracking in Vermont demonstrate that our youth need more from us. And school is a place where almost all of them come every day, every school day. And it is a place where we can meet them where they are and provide services that they, by and large, desperately need. The resolution strengthens the commitment of the Vermont School Boards Association to provide the services that our kids need and deserve, and to bring about not just additional funding for wellness for our youth, but systems level change, because the way we're doing mental health now, frankly, it's not working. This has been described in detail by one of the superintendents in a recent legislative hearing, that the current practice of drawing mental health professionals into schools is causing unintended consequences and, frankly, some degree of harm to our communities by reducing the number of professionals that are available to support our neighbors, friends, colleagues, and other community members. I'm grateful for the board's recommendation to pass this resolution on behalf of the Winooski School District.
Thank you, Stephen. As Stephen just said, the recommendation of the board was to pass as a regular resolution, and you will be able to discuss. If you have any questions, please post them. And now we're going to move into a couple of VSBA resolutions. And what I mean by VSBA resolutions, this was resolutions that the resolutions committee brought to the board. And the first one, this proposal number 6, is be it resolved that VSBA supports a ban on the sale of flavored cigarettes, flavored e-cigarettes, and flavored substances that contain nicotine or are otherwise intended for use in an e-cigarette. The board's recommendation was to pass as a regular resolution. Again, you can post any questions. I think this resolution is pretty clear in its intent. Next, proposal number 7. Be resolved that The General Assembly must act to bring Vermont tuition reimbursement policy and practice into compliance with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in the Carson versus Making without violating the compel support clause in Article 3 of Chapter 1 of the Vermont Constitution. We asked that this would be passed as a regular resolution, and there was agreement in the board. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, and this is something that is going to be important in Vermont this year. And right now we have a double standard for school right now. There's the public funds being spent at religious schools that also could be discriminating. And this opens the door. This is going to be an important conversation that Vermont is going to be working as a state through this session. We want to make sure that there's accountability for the use of public funds and that everybody plays by the same rules. Moving to proposal number 8. Thank you, Cara. So this one is the VSBA calls on General Assembly to prohibit the use of restraint and seclusion in any learning environment that receives public funds from the state of Vermont, except when there is a threat of imminent danger, and that's important to highlight there, imminent danger of serious physical harm to the student or others, and when it occurs in a manner that protects the safety of our children. Further, the VSBA calls for a thorough data reporting requirements that will provide students demographic information and the development of implementation of statewide technical assistance to promote positive development of youth through evidence-based, developmentally appropriate programs. Technical assistance should address consistent and accurate reporting to include demographic information. The recommendation of the board was to pass as a regular resolution. So we got a little bit of back and forth in this resolution. What I want to make clear is that if you're doing it right now, you have nothing to worry. This really what it does is like puts everybody in the same playing field, and it puts the bar really high. So we make sure that the only time that we're restraining is when there's imminent danger of serious physical harm to the students. And proposal number 9, the General Assembly should amend Vermont's open meeting law to make fully remote meetings a permanent voluntary option. Our recommendation is to pass as a regular resolution. This doesn't mean that you won't be having meetings in person. This just provides another tool for your boards to use it when you need to have a remote meeting. For example, student hearings, for example, when we had the pandemic, for example, in the floods that just happened in central Vermont. So it's just a tool. It doesn't mean that we are asking to not have meetings in person. So now I'll give it back to you, Debbie, so we can.
Thanks, Flor. So thank you, everybody, the presenters, for presenting your resolutions today and explaining what went behind them. And thank you, Flor and Kara, for walking us through this whole process. Thank you to all our committee members, and obviously to all the participants for your great questions and eager participation today. Here in front of you, you can see information about the annual meeting, which will be happening at the conference. We put up a QR code, so there's no excuses. All you have to do right now is take your phone and hover it over that QR code, and it'll take you straight to a registration page. So if you haven't registered for the annual conference, which again, part of that will be our annual meeting on October 26th at 4 p.m. at Lake Maury Resort, please register now. We would love for all of you to join us at the conference, and we are going to be looking at ways that the essential work of school boards can impact student outcomes and ways that we all can support student success through our school district governance. So keep your eyes open on the weekly updates that come into your email boxes every Tuesday for information about the conference and other events that VSBA hosts. Again, thank you all very much for your time today and for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next month at Lake Maury Resort, if not before. Thank you all.